Okay, I'm making this video to give you a brief introduction into our research paper. Now, this is not a composition course, so I'm not going to teach you how to write the research paper from scratch, but I did want to give you a very brief overview and preview of what I expect out of your paper and to show you a few things that may help you along the way. So, here we are logged into Blackboard. If you have not already done so, the first thing you need to do is download the research paper documents. Over here, located on the left-hand side, click on Research Paper Documents and then download the guidelines. Okay, these guidelines will tell you the mechanics of the paper and what I expect the paper to be about. The first thing I want you to realize, I'm not looking for a list of facts and figures. What I'm looking for is an argument. And if you look at the topics, you will see how that argument is laid out. So, first thing you need to do, download the guidelines. Second thing you need to do is pick one of these following topics. Now, I am going to limit your papers to one of these three topics. In the past, I allowed students to choose their own topics, and I got some really crazy off-the-wall stuff. So these are the three pre-approved topics. I want you to pick one of them. And if you read through them, you notice they're laid out kind of like an argument. Pick one or the other and give examples for each. That's what your research paper is all about. You're making this argument, and then you're providing your research as evidence as to why your argument is right. So there is no right or wrong answer. I want you to be aware of that. There is no right or wrong answer for any of these three choices as long as you can provide evidence, as long as you can provide research as to why you decided the way that you decided. So download the guidelines, pick one of the topics. Plagiarism. I want you guys to understand, plagiarism is passing off someone else's work as your own. It's not necessarily the word-for-word copying out of a book or off of a website. For example, let's say that you are reading a source and it's from the 1700s. Okay, that shouldn't happen in this class since this is U.S. History 2, but let's just say for another class you're reading a source and it's from the 1700s, and you copy it word for word into your paper without giving credit to the author. That's pretty obvious. That's plagiarism. I think we would all agree on that. But let's say you're reading a source from the 1700s and you think to yourself, man, this is really hard to understand. It's this old English. It's difficult to get my head around it. I'm going to paraphrase it, put it into my own words, and since I'm not copying the original author word for word, I don't have to give him credit. No, that is still plagiarism because it's not the word for word copying, it's taking the original author's intent. So even if you paraphrase, even if you put it into your own words, you still have to give credit to the original author. Okay, the general rule of thumb is, unless it is something that is commonly known by everyone. The Founding Fathers signed the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. George Washington was the first president. Everybody knows that, right? Those sorts of generally held things you don't have to give a source for. The other thing is, if it's an original idea out of your own head, if it's your own argument, your own interpretation, your own analysis, you don't have to give a source for that either because obviously you're the one that came up with it. So for those two things, commonly held knowledge or original ideas out of your own brain, you don't have to provide a source. For everything else, it's better to be safe than sorry and give me a source. Now, the flip side of that is this. Let's say that you find a website and you love that website and you copy it word for word into your paper. And then you find another website and you love it. So you take 2 or 3 paragraphs out of that website and copy it word for word into your paper. And then you find another and you take 3 or 4 paragraphs out and you just string them all together. And you do give credit. You do say, this is where I got that information from. That's not going to be plagiarism, but is it going to be a very good paper? No. So I just want you to be aware, even if you don't commit plagiarism, it's still possible to produce a poorly written paper without plagiarism. Okay, sources for this paper. You need at least 4 sources, and 2 of those sources must be in some sort of a print format, either a book, an academic journal, newspaper, magazine article, something that was printed at one point in time. Now here's the deal about print sources. I know that a lot of our access to print sources is limited. Okay, there's only so many books you can physically fit into a library before you start to run out of space. So my rule on print sources is this: as long as it was printed at some point in time, I will still count it as a print source. So an example of this: let's say that you find a newspaper article on the internet from the 1950s. Even though you don't have the newspaper in your hand, you just found a scanned PDF of it on some archival site on the internet. You know, you go to the New York Times and they have all of their past issues scanned into an archival format. Okay, fine. I will count that as a print source. You find an ebook that's being loaned out by your library. Even though you don't have the physical book in your hand, as long as it was printed at some point in the past, I will count that as a print source. So please don't think that you have to travel into a library, or you're going to have to travel to some far-off city and wade through stacks of physical books in order to find the information you need. That's not true. There are reams of information available on the internet. So as long as it was printed at some point in the past, I will count that as a print source. 2 out of the 4 have to be print. The other 2 can be internet sites. Please use your discretion as to the accuracy of these websites. Don't use just anything, right? Government websites, major national organization websites, those things are going to be fairly accurate. Don't just use somebody's random web page as one of your sources. Alright, don't use your textbook as a source, okay? That cannot be one of your print sources. That's too easy, and the deal about textbook is they give very broad overviews of information. What I'm looking for in this research paper, I want you to go beyond the textbook, okay? So don't use that as one of your sources. And the other thing I want to mention is Wikipedia. Oh, Wikipedia. Everybody loves Wikipedia. And it's pretty amazing, right? You have the entire wealth of human knowledge available at your fingertips. Crazy stuff. The problem with Wikipedia, of course, is that anyone can go in and edit it. So even though they've done tests on it, they've done research into it, and it's like 97% accurate, okay, fine, that's wonderful. Still, there's always that sliver of doubt. So here's the deal with Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not the devil. Wikipedia is a great research tool. Let's say that you want to do a paper on Theodore Roosevelt, and you don't know anything about Theodore Roosevelt except for the 2 or 3 paragraphs you read in your book. Well, you go to Wikipedia and look at the Teddy Roosevelt entry, and you will notice that there is anything you ever wanted to know and more about Teddy Roosevelt. It goes through his entire life, his political career, all kinds of really interesting information that might be perfect for your paper. The only problem is you can't use any of it because you can't use Wikipedia as a source. But for most Wikipedia articles, once you get to the end, you will see there is a whole list of references, and you can see there are hundreds of references. These are all the sources that the author used in order to create this Wikipedia entry. These things are good. So for example, this one from PBS. PBS is a reputable source. If you read something in the article and notice that little 12, after that sentence, there's a number, and you correspond that number down here to these references, and you can find where that author found that information. So you go to the PBS website, and you find information about Teddy Roosevelt. Now this is a good source. You can use this website, and that's fine. Now I do want to say, don't just read something in the Wikipedia article and then copy this stuff down and assume that it's correct. I want you to actually go to the source that they're quoting and make sure that that information is in fact accurate. But this is good. Don't quote Wikipedia itself. Use the source that they use. So Wikipedia is a great place to get a very broad overview of the subject that you're looking at. It's a great place to find further sources. And if you notice, even after the references they used to create this entry, they give further readings. They say, if you like this, you're going to love that. All of these books They may not be available in your local library, but they might be available on the internet, and they might be available through interlibrary loan. Okay, so all kinds of good stuff from Wikipedia. Just don't use Wikipedia itself. Be sure to double check that those sources actually say what the author said they said. Okay, so 4 sources, 2 must be print, the other 2 can be internet. The paper itself must be 3 to 5 pages in length. That does not include the title page or works cited page, of which you will have both. Standard double-spaced 12-point font, 1-inch margins. Please do not get to the end of your paper. You know, you're sitting there and you're writing and you're writing and you're writing, and you have wrung your brain completely dry, and you look back over it and you think, oh man, I've only got 2.5 pages. Let me make the margins 1.5 inches, and I'll use the size 14 font, and that'll stretch it out, and he'll never know the difference. I will know the difference. Okay, I've been there before. I've done it all before. It's much better to submit a slightly shortened paper. And hey, 3 to 5 pages is incredibly short. That is a really, really short paper. Once you put in footnotes, once you double space everything, 3 to 5 pages is really a very short paper. So don't play around with the margins and the font size to stretch it out. And when I say, that being said, when I say 3 to 5 pages, that's what I mean. If you hand a paper that's 2.5 pages, yes, I'm going to knock off points. Don't think that just because you run over one line onto the 3rd page, that's a 3-page paper, because it is not. Okay, so 3 to 5 pages in length, double spaced, with a title and works cited page, standard font, standard margins. Alright, after those sort of brief guidelines, I've given you examples of what all of this should look like. Oh, the last thing, Turabian style footnotes. We'll talk about that in a minute. Alright, so this is an example of one of my old papers. This is what your title page should look like. I don't really care how you arrange it. I don't really care what information. You know, put your name, put my name, put the title of the paper, obviously. Put the date and the class. Space it out, make it look nice and neat, but beyond that, there's no set rhyme or reason or format you have to follow. Okay, this is an example page of text. Now I want you to pay particular attention to this first sentence. Charles was the 2nd son of King James I. James I was the first in the Stuart dynasty to wear the crown of England. That is not commonly held information, and that is not an original idea out of my brain. So I have to show where I got that information, and we do that through citations. Now, the particular type of citation you're going to use in this research paper is known as Turabian. That's a lady's name. Her name was Kate Turabian. She came up with this. It's very similar to what's known as Chicago style. So if you ever see Chicago style, that's pretty close to Turabian. But anyway, so look. Charles was the 2nd son of King James I. James I was the first in the Stuart dynasty to wear the crown of England. 1. Notice that 1. You drop down to the bottom of the paper and you correspond that 1 to that 1 right there, and you will see I found that information in a book written by J.P. Kenyon entitled The Stuarts, A Study in English Kingship, published in New York by John Wiley & Sons in 1967 on page 73. So it still has all the information that it would in, say, an MLA formatted paper. It's just arranged a little bit differently. Go back up. Henry was thought destined to be a great ruler, and many hopes were pinned on him. 2. Fall down, you see that was in a book written by Roger Lockyer, Tudor and Stuart Britain, 1470 and 170, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's the whole point of footnotes, to show where you got your information, okay? They start with 1 and they go all the way through the paper. So, you know, if you have 12 footnotes, you start with footnote 1 and you'll end with footnote number 12. It doesn't start over on every page. They just run throughout the paper consecutively. We'll talk more about footnotes in just a little bit. Footnotes are easy. Microsoft Word does all the work for you. What I would suggest, though, as you're doing your research, every time you crack open a new book, every time you load up a new web page, you write all that information down at the top of a new sheet of paper. So every time you open a new book, write down the title, write down the author, write down the date of publication, the place of publication. All that stuff can be found on the title page of the book. And then as you're going through making your notes, write down the page numbers as you're making your notes, so when you go back to write your paper, you don't have to thumb through all the books that you've looked at. You've just got everything there that you can reference to. Okay. And then the last example I've given you is an example of a works cited page. A works cited page is the page that lists all the sources that you used for that paper. So you should have at least 4 entries, right? Because you have to have at least 4 sources. Here's the thing that I run into with students on a works cited page. It's a little bit different than a bibliography. Looks similar, acts in a similar fashion, it fulfills the same role, but it's a little bit different. And here's what I don't want to see on your works cited page. Let's say that in the course of your paper, you've got 8 footnotes. No, that's a bad example. Let's say you've got 5 footnotes, and all 5 footnotes are from a different source. Now that doesn't necessarily happen, and that brings up a new point I'll come back to in just a second. But each of your 5 footnotes is from a different source. But when I go to your works cited page, you give me 10 sources. And so what I'm going to be thinking in my head is, this person used 5 of them, that they gave credit to 5 authors, but they obviously looked at these other 5 sources and they didn't give credit to those authors. So why did they include them in the works cited page? What did they take from those other 5 sources that they didn't give credit to? That's what I'm going to be thinking in my mind. So the rule of thumb is, if you don't list a source in a footnote, don't put it on the works cited page. And that's literally what the page is. It's a list of sources that you cited throughout your paper. So if you reference 6 different sources in the paper, you should only have 6 entries on the works cited page. Notice that it does go in alphabetical order according to the first word. If we're talking about books, that should be the first letter of the author's last name. Notice that when it runs over onto a second line, that second line is indented. That's known as a hanging indent, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But going back just a minute to the footnotes, notice notes 4 and 5. John Miller, The Stuarts, published in London by Hamilton in London, 2004, page 69. You only have to write out the long form of that note once. The next time you use that same source, you can go back, just put the author's last name and the new page number. So the next time I used it, you notice there, note number 5, Miller, 70, period. So you only have to write out that long form once. The next time you can just reference the author's last name and the new page number. Now obviously, if you use books by the same author, you have to give me a shortened form of the title so I know which book you're referring to. Notice note number 3, that is IBID. IBID for some reason seems to confuse a lot of people, so if you don't want to use IBID, that's fine. I don't care. All IBID means though is it's exactly the same note as the note before it. Same author, same book, even the exact same page number. So this could be Lockyer, 244, period. You could write that out if you wanted to. If you want to use IBID, that's wonderful. I just want you to know what it is if you happen to stumble across that anywhere else. It's a Latin phrase, and I forget what the literal meaning is, but it just means that which came immediately before, right? So it just means it's the exact same thing as note number 2, or whatever the preceding note would have been. Okay. So those are examples of text, title pages, and works cited pages. Okay, the other thing you need to download is the Turabian Stylesheet. This will show you how to write out your footnotes and works cited entries, and they are different. So don't just go and copy all of your footnotes and paste it onto a works cited page, because that's not the way it works. It's a slightly different format. And you should only have 1 entry on the works cited page. Even if you use a book multiple times, you know, you've got 5 notes all from the same book, it only has 1 entry on the works cited page because you're talking about that work as a singularity. It's just that 1 book, not each individual page. It's just that 1 book. So, okay. If you're using a book by a single author, it should look like this on the footnote. First name, last name, comma, title, open parentheses, place of publication, colon, publisher, comma, date of publication, close parentheses, comma, page number, period. Book by multiple authors, newspaper article, magazine article, journal article, website. That should pretty much be all that you use. If you want to use a different type of source that's not listed there, let me know and we will work something out. Okay. Websites. Websites are funny. Sometimes they have authors, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have page dates, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have titles, sometimes they don't. The bare minimum that I'm looking for on a website entry, I want you to give me a title. Even if you have to make one up, that's perfectly fine. Give me some sort of title. Give me the actual address, the www.whatever, and then give me the date that you looked at it. Accessed, whatever date it was. That's the bare minimum. If it's got an author, that's fine. You can include that. But at the bare minimum, I want a title, the actual address, and then the date that you accessed it. Okay, that's what it looks like when you use it in a footnote. If you use that same, when you go to list that source on your Works Cited page, it looks a little bit different. So you can see here, book by a single author. They use that same information down here on the Works Cited form. This time, however, it's last name, comma, first name, period, title, period, place of publication, colon, publisher, comma, date, period. So it's the same information, but it's just a little bit different. Why they make it a little bit different? They want you to suffer. I don't know. It's just the way that it's done, so that's the way we're going to do it. Please notice, Works Cited form, there is no page number because you're not talking about a single page. You're telling me I used this work, I used this newspaper, I used this book, or I used this website, okay? Okay. So that gives you examples of footnotes. It gives you examples of what those same notes should look like on the Works Cited page. And then a few more notes. You can read through these notes. I've already explained most of this. The last thing that I want to show you to do is how to do this in Microsoft Word. So if you use a different program other than Word, it may be a little bit different, but I'm assuming that most modern word processing programs will do something to this effect. So let's say that you're writing your paper, and I'm not actually, like, excuse my typing. All right, you're writing your paper, and you come to the spot where you need to insert your first footnote. As I mentioned, Microsoft is easy. It does all the work for you. All you do is go up to the top, click on Insert. No, I'm sorry, excuse me, References. Go to the top, you click on the References tab, Insert Footnote. It puts in the little superscript 1. It drops you down to the bottom. It changes the font size for you. You type out your information. You can go back up and continue typing. You get to the spot where you need to put in your second footnote. Insert footnote. It puts a 2. It drops you down to the bottom. Type it out. Very, very easy. It keeps track of the numbering for you. It keeps track of the font changes for you. It does everything for you. Neat and simple and easy. The other thing I wanted to show you was the Works Cited page. Now let's suppose I could do this correctly. You have that centered. You'd say underline, Works Cited. You drop down. Also notice that in the text I did make it double space. So you're writing your Works Cited entries, and as I mentioned, if it goes over on the Works Cited entries are not double spaced. I mean, I'm not really going to count off, but if we're being technical, they're not double spaced entries. So as I mentioned, the second line has to be scooted over. Why it has to be scooted over, I don't know. That's just the way things are done. Now, you may think to yourself, I can put my cursor there and hit the tab button and I'll be fine. No, Microsoft Word hates you and wants you to suffer, because if you tab, it tabs over the entire thing. What you got to do is, and I'll go ahead and I'll add another one just to show you how it's done. Once you get everything typed out, highlight everything, go back to paragraph where you can right click. Right here on the special box, this little drop down menu, click hanging, okay, and it automatically scoots the second and third or fourth, if it takes that many lines over for you. Very neat, very easy, very simple. And so if you were continuing, say it continues on to the third line as well. So that's how you do a hanging indent for a works cited page. And that's pretty much it. If you have any questions about the mechanics, how do I get my paper to look a certain way? If you have any questions about the prompts, what do I mean by argument? Am I supposed to be arguing this or that? You know, if you have any questions about how to do research, if you have any questions, let me know, please. Obviously, letting me know sooner is better than emailing me the night before and asking how do I do this. So get started as soon as possible, so if you do run into issues, we have time to work through them. All right, thanks.